Sword and Citadel by Gene Wolfe, volumes 3 and 4 of the Book of the New Sun, those being the Sword of the Lictor and the Citadel of the Autarch, respectively. So this is kind of the conclusion to the main bulk of the Book of the New Sun, because there's 5 books, but the 5th book is kind of like a coda that came after these main 4. So this is kind of the conclusion to the main part of the series, I'll say, and it really leaves you wondering. It kind of raises more questions than it answers in a lot of ways, but I'm going to go through it as best I can. So, like with my review of Shadow and Claw, I will summarize these books as best I can. And even though I may, tell what happens in the plot, I really don't think that is the same as spoiling it in the case of these books, because it's not really the events themselves in the Book of the New Sun, I think, so much as it is the significance of those events. So I can probably just spoil the whole thing in terms of telling you what happens, but you still won't really get it, so to speak, unless you read the books, because it's really something that you don't just have to read, you have to read into. And that's very apparent by the conclusion of this book, or these books, I should say. But anyway, so picking up after the Claw of the Conciliator, Severian and Dorcas, the young woman whom he mysteriously resurrected in the first book, The Shadow of the Torturer, finally make it to the city of Thrax, where he has been dispatched to be an executioner. And he does his job for a while. He tortures and kills some people. That is, after all, what a torturer is trained to do, I suppose. But then, wouldn't you know it, he gets soft-hearted again, and he ends up letting a woman who was condemned to death go free, and that puts his head now on the proverbial chopping block. He is now a wanted man. So he and Dorcas split up because she is having some kind of a crisis in her life, because she realizes that she truly was dead and that Severian resurrected her. So she wants to go try to find out what her previous life was like. So they split up, and Severian sets out to try to return the Claw of the Conciliator to the Pellerines, who were like a sisterhood of priestesses that he initially got the Claw from inadvertently. And the Claw of the Conciliator is the artifact of the titular conciliator, who is I don't want to say it's Jesus, but it sounds very, very close to being Jesus. The conciliator is like an ancient prophet figure who is the conciliator between man and God, which in these books is known as the Increate or the Pancreator. And so it's basically like Jesus, and it's some kind of religious artifact. And this is the thing that Severian thinks is giving him the power to resurrect the dead and heal people. Although it's very ambiguous in these books, it might just be that he's doing it himself and he doesn't really know how. But anyway, so he sets out to return the Claw of the Conciliator to the Pellerines, and so he journeys on foot over a lot of land. And then he eventually comes across this house where these people are living, and then he has to fight a monster, which kills all of them except a young boy who is ironically also named Severian. So now there's 2 Severians. So he takes the kid under his wing, and they set out, and then they fight some sorcerers or something, and then they come to another ancient ruin of some kind of big, ruinous city or something. And little Severian dies. He doesn't make it that long. So now we're back to 1 Severian, and then he meets this figure named Typhon, who is some kind of ruler from times past, and he tries to entice Severian into his service, but then Severian kills him and moves on. And so he eventually comes to this city or this village by a lake, and he gets caught up in a battle between the lake people and a mysterious local kind of lord who lives in a castle and who is performing like experiments on them. And lo and behold, it's actually Baldanders and Dr. Talos from the previous books. And now they're not friends anymore because Severian is leading the lake people against them. There's a big fight. Severian's badass executioner sword, Terminus Est, gets destroyed. And then the claw also gets destroyed mostly. And so then that's how the Sword of the Lictor wraps up. And then we roll right into the final book, The Citadel of the Autarch. Severian keeps going, trying to find the Pelorines, and he eventually makes his way into the north, which I think means that he's making his way closer to the equator. And so this is where the war is. In the background of these books, there's like this big war between the people of the Commonwealth and some people called the Asians, which I think that's like it seems like it's some kind of there's some kind of communist society. These people appear to have no individual identity, and they speak in weird platitudes. But anyway, Severian makes his way up north, and he's going to enlist in the army for lack of anything better to do, I guess. And so he ends up resurrecting another soldier, another person, a soldier with the claw, or maybe he only thinks it's with the claw. Anyway, then he goes and he eventually does find the Pelorines, and he kind of he disburdens himself of the claw. And then he goes to war. He winds up in a military unit. And he goes to war. There's extended battle sequences in this book. It kind of turns into some kind of sci-fi war novel for a time. But then he gets injured, and then he gets rescued by the Autarch himself, the ruler. And then the Autarch is also injured. And then Severian has to kill him and eat part of his brain along with some kind of drug that like allows him to absorb the Autarch's memories and also all the memories that the Autarch had absorbed from other previous people. So Severian winds up being the new Autarch. That's how he comes to be the Autarch, as he tells us at the beginning of the books that he is the ruler now. So now he's the Autarch. He goes back to the city that he initially started out of, and he's informed by, I think it's an alien, but it takes the form of like an old teacher of his, that he has to journey somewhere beyond the stars to undergo some kind of trial at the hands of someone or something to determine whether humanity is worthy of the new sun. And the new sun in these books is not well, it is kind of like a new sun, literally, but it's also a man, which it's basically like the second coming of Christ in these books, basically. So Severian is going to have to undergo some kind of trial to determine if humanity is worthy of it. And then he also learns, kind of disturbingly, I think, if I'm interpreting this right, that Dorcas is actually his grandmother. So the woman that he's just been shagging with throughout these books is actually his own grandmother, and he meets what I think is his father. And then the books end with Severian saying, "I'm finna go to the stars, and we're gonna bring back that new sun and save the world." So that's how these books go. And that's how the main Book of the New Sun series concludes, except for, again, the fifth book, which is kind of a coda, I think. And oh boy, these books truly are singular. They really are. I cannot liken these books to much, even though the elements which they contain, as I said in my review of Shadow and Claw, are very familiar, but they're treated in such a way that they don't seem that way in the Book of the New Sun. And these books are truly wild. They are very singular, like I said. And I absolutely loved these books, all four of them. They're again, there's just not that much I can liken this to because This is sci-fi, but this is very, very literary sci-fi. Like um, this is not just science fiction. This is literary fiction, and also, as I said in my review of Shadow and Claw, this is theological fiction as well. But I'll touch on that, I suppose. But the writing in these books, it's great. Gene Wolfe is a great writer. It's just as strong as it was in Shadow and Claw. The prose is quite elevated. Really, it's truly remarkable in the writing aspect of it. And the character Severian is still not a very likable character. He's really not very savory, but he is a very complex and interesting character, and that's what counts, I guess. Um, so yeah, it's still strong in that regard as well. But the story of this, uh, it like I said, it leaves you kind of with more questions than answers because it's only in the last book, kind of, that we see what these books are really about, which is Severian uh, becoming the autarch, um, and also possibly being this conciliator reborn himself. It's in I think that's reflected in the titles of these books. The Shadow of the Torturer, he is a torturer. The Claw of the Conciliator, I think he is the conciliator. The Sword of the Lictor, he is the lictor of Thrax in that book, and then the Citadel of the Autarch, he eventually becomes the Autarch. So he embodies, I think, all of the figures and the titles of these books. But there's still so much that we don't know, that it's so much that is ambiguous, and it kind of hits you with something of a bitch slap of what the hell at the very end of the last book, where Severian relates that he is not the first Severian. And I don't know what that means. There's so much about these books that I don't know. Like Gene Wolfe intended these books, as I'm given to understand it, to be read multiple times, to where you in order to really make sense of it, you have to read it and reread it and maybe reread it again to actually get it. So I'm kind of maybe at a disadvantage reviewing this and just having read it once. But there's so much in these books that I'm sure I just don't get, and I don't understand. Like at the end of, so we're told in these books that like it becomes it kind of. I think you can piece together what he means. We're told in the last book, I think, that the universe is cyclical. It starts with like a big bang, and then everything spreads out, but then everything eventually comes back and starts over. And so the universe is basically infinite, and each birth and death um, of the universe is like one cosmic year, I think. So we know that things now have been happening basically forever. And so Severian at the end of the book says, I'm not the first Severian, it meaning that another Severian from a previous universe somehow influenced what is influencing or influenced what's happening in this one or something. Hell if I know. This is just a trip really reading these books, but I freaking loved it. It's kind of enigmatic. It really is. But to come back around to my what I was saying about the theological aspects of these books, beyond just the science fiction aspect of the story, and beyond just like the kind of hero's journey or the dubious hero's journey that we get, or even the stuff about cyclical universes and the eternal return, if you will. Beyond just any of that, these books are really very, very spiritual. And as I said in my review of Shadow and Claw, I would hesitate to call these Christian fiction in the traditional sense because they're way too graphic, both in terms of violence and sex, to fit that mold nicely. But they're very, very theological. And what I think the real core of the books is that you don't have to just read. I mean, the books in order to piece together what the plot of the books really is, I think you have to read it over and over. But to get the heart of the books. I don't think you have to read it but once. And what I think the real meaning of these books is mortals striving to connect with and understand the will of the divine, which in these books is called the increate. There's lots of musings of Severians in these books about God and whether God exists, what the purpose of any of this is, and the way things actually are behind the scenes. It's very thoughtful, and I just really love it. And in fact, to read a little section um, from these books that I thought illustrated this quite well. There's a scene here when Severian is traveling with the little Severian, the little boy who's also named the same thing as him, where he's talking about um, powers of light and darkness. Again, this fits kind of it. Again, I wouldn't call this Christian fiction, but it fits a Christian cosmology certainly. And of course, Gene Wolfe was very devoutly Catholic, as I'm given to understand it. But anyway, we have this passage here that I thought really was interesting, and it reads as such. Yet there is truth to the talk of darkness and light, because it shows plainly that one implies the other. The tale I read to little Severian said that the universe was but a long word of the increates, and that's, hearkening to the Bible. In the beginning was the word, we then are the syllables of that word. But the speaking of any word is futile unless there are other words, words that are not spoken. If a beast has but one cry, the cry tells nothing, and even the wind has a multitude of voices, so that those who sit indoors may hear it and know if the weather is tumultuous or mild. The powers we call dark seem to me to be the words the increate did not speak, if the increate exists at all. And these words must be maintained in a quasi-existence, if the other word, the word spoken, is to be distinguished. What is said can be important, what is not said can be important, but what is said is more important. So again, that really kind of it really kind of gives you a sense, I think, of what these books are really about on a thematic level, which is very theological. And these books are very, very valuable, I think, because they engage with that in a way that's not the way that you might typically see it done in fiction such as this. So there, modern day, like nowadays, I'm not so sure how many books that you get that truly, like, really engage with the ideas of God and theology, because we live in a much more secular world now. So I don't know if there's that many authors out there that is really, really going for it in that regard. But also in a lot of science fiction books or dystopian post-apocalyptic books, which this kind of fits into. Religion is often portrayed in like kind of a negative light as like a tool of oppression or deceit or something like that. But these books aren't. They're very earnest in their portrayal of their theological concerns. And I really, really like that. And it's never like beating you over the head or preachy or anything, but like you can tell that these books do have something to say. They have something on their mind. And I really did like that. So the plot of these books was wild as hell. Like it was a true wild ride reading these books. And like I said, there's so much that I just don't understand about it. I'm sure I will probably have to reread these books at some point in the future if I really want to get it. But it's definitely something that will make you have to think if you really want to, really engage with these books as they kind of want you to. So yeah, I just loved the Book of the New Sun. Although I still have the fifth book to read, so I'm gonna hold off on my overall rating of the series, I suppose, until I finish that book. But to rate Sword and Citadel, just like Shadow and Claw, I'm giving this book an A. I love this. The character of Severian, while certainly not very likable, is very, very interesting, and the journey that he goes on is equally so. And the way that these books wrap up, it's kind of like what it throws a lot at you. These books really do, especially there towards the end. But It doesn't hold your hand. It doesn't pander to you. This is big boy grown up science fiction, and this is science fiction of the best variety. This is truly, if it's not the greatest work of science fiction, it's definitely up there at the top of the pile, because this isn't just science fiction. This is true literature. So yeah, I'm giving Sword and Citadel an A. I loved it, and also the ponderous theological heart of it, I also found very, very intriguing. And really, these books are just, they're just honestly great, honestly. So yeah, Sword and Citadel gets an A. So Sword and Citadel by Gene Wolfe, or the Book of the New Sun overall. Have you read it? Let me know down in the comments what you thought, whether you have agreed or disagreed with what I've said here today. If you haven't read it, well, like I said with Shadow and Claw, I'll hold off recommending it until I read the fifth one, just to see how everything comes out. Uh, Even though the bulk of it is I've read now, but I will say I think it's something that I'm going to be able. I'll say that right now. I think this is something that I could probably recommend, because these books are honestly something else. But anyway, and as always, if you have enjoyed anything you've seen or heard here today, remember to hit that like button and subscribe. I would really appreciate it. And until next time, peace.